fellow empaths. Oh, y'all are gonna love our episode today. Today we have Anna Rapp on the podcast. Anna is a business mentor and mindset coach, and she specializes in selling with heart and money mindset, two of my favorite topics. So you know it's gonna be a good conversation. I only just recently was connected with Anna. We have the same podcast producer, Haley. Actually, huge shout out to Haley over at Heart Centered Podcasting. She is the absolute best. And she thought that we would be great guests for each other's show. And I couldn't agree more. It was such an easy, natural conversation. We cover on the episode a lot of Anna's journey and transitioning from being a full-time therapist, transitioning to coaching full-time. She shares that it was actually when she was pregnant with her second child, her daughter, that she realized that she craved more time freedom. And it was while she was pregnant that she filled her coaching practice so that after her maternity leave, she did not have to go back to her 9-to-5. And what a cool story. She shares what it's like to run and operate a values-aligned business. And we talk a lot about the money mindset work that both Anna and I do in our businesses. And Anna shares some of her favorite money affirmations that she does with clients. There's one that she shares a lot on social media that I think is just really powerful. She says, "It's safe for me to create abundant income in my business." I think that is such a powerful reminder as we're acclimatizing to new levels of wealth and abundance in our lives. Finally, the last thing I'll just share before we jump into the episode is we also cover some of the terms that Anna has rewritten when she teaches about sales. Instead of coaching to objections that get in the way of the sale, she calls them hesitations. And I think that is such a powerful reframe. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Let's jump in. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Anna, why don't we just dive in, and I'd love for you to share with my audience a little bit about you and your story and how you transitioned from your daytime to your full-time business.
Yes, I love that question. I almost feel like I'm the entrepreneur that almost didn't become an entrepreneur because I really liked my job as a therapist. I really enjoyed, in some ways, I'm a glass half full person, which in many ways is nice, but in other ways is hard because it's hard to change or see the potential in other things. But I loved my clients. I had the best therapy boss. And a lot of things were positive. The one downside was the time freedom, right? And so I decided to start doing life coaching on the side, on the weekends, in the mornings. And that was kind of my inroad in and kind of how I fell in love with it.
Do you find that you're having similar conversations with clients that you used to have with your therapy patients?
That's such a good question. I get that question a lot too, those distinctions, that line, right? I think in some ways, I love the name of your podcast. I think my vibe and my sentiment and how I feel with my clients is similar, but I would say our topics are different. And some of the other pieces are different too, like boundaries. I don't have to have as many boundaries with my coaching clients as I did with my therapy clients. The topics that we talk about are different. I would say like those are the like distinguishing factors kind of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I appreciate that piece about the boundaries being like needing to have less boundaries, because I feel similarly. I've worked with therapists and coaches both for years, and sometimes I really just want to know my coach's perspective, and I've worked with the same coach for 5 years now. And oftentimes she is also very boundaried and creates so much space for me to talk about myself. But sometimes I'll like purposely just ask her, will you please tell me your opinion, or what do you do here? And, it's great.
Yes, totally. I think coaches can like ride that like mentory line a little bit more. I have a course where like I teach women how to like get their first client, but also marketing, but also like coaching technique. And like one thing I ask all of them to identify is what percent are you a coach and what percent are you a mentor or a strategist or an advice giver, right? Or a teacher. Because I think like all coaches, like we get to select, are we 100% a coach? Are we 50% a coach? Like how much are we teaching and how much are we like pure coaching, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I appreciate that practice, because I think sometimes when you're trained in a certain way as a coach, it can be challenging to give yourself that permission to call yourself whatever you want to call yourself, whether it's coach, mentor, teacher, trainer, etc. So I think, like the idea of tracking it, like how much, what percentage, that's such a fun practice. I love that.
It kind of ambiguous, right? But yeah, it's nice to assess and ask yourself, like, intuitively what feels most aligned for me when it comes to those roles, right?
Mm-hmm. We were chatting before we started recording about some shared, I guess, passions for talking about money in our coaching practices. And I'd love for you to share a bit about, and you've written a book on, what is the name of your book?
It's called 20K Freedom Fund.
20K Freedom Fund. We'll add it in the show notes, but I'd love for you to share some of your beliefs about money and some of the work you do with your clients about that.
Yes. Money, right? I would say my journey truly started with it, or like my biggest evolution started about 3 years ago when I was making decent money in my business, but I still didn't feel like I was in control of my finances and things felt really wonky. Obviously, I was also in the middle of a divorce at that time. So obviously like a lot of things were up in the air, but I did feel like I didn't have control over my money. And I like to make affirmations. So the first affirmation that I made, don't copy this one, was I have complete control over my money and finances, right? And obviously we know that like no one has control over money, but I'm glad that I made it because it was like a starting ground, right? It was like the direction. And then later my coach helped me say like, Anna, I don't think you want control over your money. I think you just want 20K in the bank. Like you want savings. That's going to create the stability that you're wanting, right? Even if you don't have control on like the ups and downs of it. And I was like, oh, is that it? And that was it. And so I saved 20K in the bank in about 3 months, fortunately. And that completely changed how I related to money. Obviously, there's other important pieces too, but I think it made me realize like how few women out there, as I was talking to my clients, in their business don't have a reserve, a cash reserve, and in their personal life don't have an emergency fund. So I started calling it a freedom fund because people were like, I don't want to save an emergency fund because like, I don't want to manifest an emergency, right? Or this idea of like, I can't ever spend my money when I'm like, it's time to spend the money. It's okay to spend it too. So that's the whole concept of the book and was probably one of the biggest things that changed my life and money.
I mean, I hear a couple things in that, like the idea that sometimes our money is about healing our mindset with money. And other times it's simply about being more practical with money, keeping that amount in the bank that allows us to feel safe, or getting really clear on what's coming in and what's going out. Do you find in your work that people that clients need to follow a certain order with their money work? Like, do they need to do money mindset work first? Do they need to start tracking? Like, I'm just curious.
Oh man, that's a good question. I would love to hear what your take is
I was
too.
going to say, I was thinking that as I was asking, I'm like, I don't know how I'd answer that
Yeah, I
question.
think like what I notice for my clients is, and this is really hard. I think as coaches, speaking for myself, I have a hard time like giving one answer because I love to like customize it to my client. But I think I did notice a theme with the money piece, in that whether my clients were doing great at their budgeting or all the other auxiliary components, them opening up a savings account, not at their current bank, at a different bank, and designating that as their freedom fund or their savings account, right? Really was a big game changer, even if their money habits weren't perfect, even if they were in debt, even if they weren't like, I think that piece helps the other pieces be easier if you can start that momentum. So that's kind of what I was noticing.
Mm-hmm. A couple years ago, I guess it was 2019, I launched my first mastermind. And we read a couple books that year, which were really deeply impactful for my work and my own personal kind of philosophy about money. But the first book was Worthy by Nancy Levin. She says the subtitle is Boost Your Self-Worth to Own Your Net Worth, something like that. We'll add it in the show notes. But it was so impactful for the group to really acclimatize to this experience of being worthy of amassing wealth, and for it to, be safe to amass wealth. So that we'll come back to this, but that was the first book. And then the second book, as a follow-up, was we read Profit First by Mike, I cannot say his last name, McCallowich.
Yes, I know what you mean.
And I do think that having that foundational money mindset work was very helpful as kind of a jumping off point to be able to implement some more of the practical components in Profit First.
I love that. I've never read that book, but it just sounds amazing. The Worthy one, the Profit First one too. But yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of safety, I think in your Instagram stories, you talk a lot about money affirmations, but specifically ones about it's safe for me to earn money. It's safe for me to amass wealth. And I'd love for you to talk more about that, because I think that it's such an important concept that I don't think necessarily is spoken about a lot in the wealth consciousness work.
I love it. It almost reminds me of what you were saying around like before the Profit First piece, you were doing the worthiness piece, right? I think the reason I post so much of that online is it's to counter our own inner talk, right? Around believing that it doesn't feel safe to make more money, right? And maybe you're listening to the podcast and you're like, well, I do want to make more money. I wish I had more money. I want to make more money. But it's almost this fear of success where, like, yes, it would be great to have, let's say whatever you're making right now, think about double, right? There's going to be pros to that, but there's going to be cons to that too, right? Maybe it's like, will I be able to manage my money, right? What if I have it and then I lose it and I got used to making more money? So I think, our brain sees all the negatives and all the fears. And so the reason I post that is to kind of like counteract that and really remind yourself that it's safe. Like you're going to figure out, like, it's okay for you to get used to new levels of money, wealth, happiness, abundance, right?
I mean, I think that is so important. I talk a lot about self-love in my work. And that's been my journey, right? Like my coaching journey has totally been about self-love. And I have noticed such a connection between our lovability being a function of our capacity to increase our rates and to price ourselves higher and earn more, and not mutually exclusive, but certainly related. And conversely, I've seen many clients over the years try to feel better about themselves or love themselves more through spending sometimes unhealthy amounts of money to their own detriment. So I think, healing your relationship with money is such a function of I imagine, I mean, it's certainly the work that I do, but I imagine the work you do with women as well.
Yeah. So I agree. So important.
You talk a lot about sales. So I'm curious how you notice that. How kind of your work with money and sales relates and connects and infuses itself in your work.
That's such a good question. I think I first got excited about sales before I got excited about money. I first got excited about, which sounds weird, right?
I love it.
Because I'll tell you why. Because initially in my business, I realized like I want clients, right? I want to help people. I want to serve people, right? And then I realized like, oh, what holds us back from having more clients is selling, right? We like villainize sales, but really selling is this beautiful tool that gets us to the people that we want to serve, right? And when I realized that, I was like, oh, wow, like sales is this beautiful bridge. Like sales is when we do it right, when we do it with integrity, when we do it with heart. So I really fell in love with selling for myself, for my clients. And then I realized what holds us back also from selling is the money mindset piece. Because I think we know at our core that if we were to fully show up and get visible online and express ourselves and sell our work and be our best advocate for the power of the work we do, we know it would work and we know we'd make a ton of money, right? And so I realized like our money mindset work and our ability to accept and receive bigger amounts of money was really tied into sales in that way too.
What helped you fall in love with sales? I think that is a huge journey.
I think it was when I saw that I could do it with heart. Like, I think I'd only had bad experiences with sales, either someone selling to me or like someone trying to, or I hear the funniest stories from my clients that people are like, take out your credit card on the call right now and buy from me or else your life will be ruined forever. Like that vibe. Right. So I think when we've had like weird experiences with sales, it's almost like when we have a bad experience with social media and we're like, all social media sucks. Right. Well, it's just a neutral thing like sales or like sometimes people will have a bad experience with their father, right? Or whatever it is. And so we'll just like generalize things instead of realizing selling itself. I changed that when I teach sales, I use the word invite just because I feel like sales has so much baggage, but the word in itself isn't bad. Like it's not ethical or moral or legal. Like there's nothing immoral about selling, but sometimes it can feel like, I remember I told my husband at the time when I made my first sales, I was like, I feel like I'm scamming people. Like it feels icky. He was like, are you scamming people? I was like, no, I'm not. It's just like, I had always gotten a paycheck and it felt weird to promote and receive money. Like the whole thing was strange. Right.
I think that's such like a brilliant concept, like the idea that, the way we've been sold to, the way we've been trained to sell, if we've gone through training, does not necessarily have to be our model. And it can also be a very permission giving experience to really take control of your own sales process and extend invitations or invite people to work with you in a way that is just super aligned and feels good in your nervous system.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself.
And I also think that that's a really big journey to kind of get to that place for yourself as a business owner. I'm curious what that journey was like for you. Like, what did it really look like?
I think it was like a lot of trial and error, right? And I think one of my favorite things that I share with my clients is like reframes for different sales words. Like kind of like I said, instead of using the word selling, we use the word invite, right? Instead of using the word prospects, which can feel kind of like heavy and like dehumanizing. Not that it's like a bad word, right? It's okay, people use it. But you use the word pre-clients, right? Some of them might be a potential client to me. Instead of using the word objections, we use the word like hesitations, right? So I think like for me, I think I just had to lose a lot of the baggage. And I think the journey was seeing how it was almost like had to gather evidence of how good it could be when I noticed like I would send a sales email to my list and like several people even people who didn't buy would say, oh my gosh, this email really impacted me. Thank you for sending it. Right. Or I would be on a sales call with someone, and even if they wouldn't buy from me, they would like make these big shifts and like have these life changes. Right. So I think in realizing like I can impact people even in my sales process, and my sales process helps me make money and helps me find aligned client. Like it just started feeling like there was more pros than cons all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm. I love how you reframe objections to hesitations.
Mm-hmm.
I have lots of coaching colleagues, and I was sharing with one of them my abhorrence for the word objection.
Mm-hmm.
And she just laughed at me, right? Because she had no necessarily negative connotation with it. And I was like, it just feels so masculine and aggressive and confrontational. And that's absolutely not who I am as a HSP, sensitive, empathic entrepreneur. Like it totally doesn't work for me.
Yes.
So getting to rewrite the script or rewriting the terms, that feels really like delicious.
Yeah, I know it's kind of like, it's just silly in some ways, like because it's like the same thing, but it feels different to me, right? Like it does make it feel differently somehow, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's everything, I think when we were talking about values alignment before we get on this call, but when we can truly get to a place of building our business and our business processes in alignment with our values, like that's when we find and can attract our people.
Yes, it's so true.
Let's talk about values alignment. What does it look like to run a business in alignment with your values?
I love this question. For me, like too, when people ask, like, what does heart-centered mean? That's your brand, that's your podcast. Like for me, it's like another word for like value alignment, right? I think, and this has to do with sales too, right? When you know what your values are in your life, in your business, period, right? I think it helps you check everything for congruency, right? And so for me, like one of my core values is like honesty, another one is excellence, right? So really putting everything through that lens, like as I'm getting visible in my marketing, as I'm selling, as I'm serving my clients, am I showing up in a way that matches that, right? And for me, it helps me prioritize what's important and then what's less important, right? Okay, I want my coaching courses and programs to be excellent, but they're not going to be perfect, right? So it's like, what, how can I show up and have alignment in that way?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'd say truly that's why I launched the podcast, because I was so committed to heart-centered women in business and those who identified as empaths and sensitives to have examples of other heart-centered entrepreneurs who have learned to thrive financially and otherwise. Wow. Because I think that as empaths, and we can often be so practiced in giving and being generous, but opening ourselves up to receive, opening ourselves up to receive financially and abundantly is a transformation. So for me, like that's like values alignment for sure. and normalizing that's okay, that we get to earn a thriving income.
It's so true. I think like especially like you said, it's so easy to like receive or to give and to help, right? But it is this other piece of like receiving support, money, right? Like really believing that we're worthy of that and that we can keep our values and we can keep our alignment and we don't have to change who we are necessarily in order to expand in our abundance and happiness, right?
I think another part of that journey is not taking on people's projections when they can't be with that. So, what I mean by that is I think as we, as empaths, we sense other people's insecurities or lack of healing around their own money work. So I think that, surrounding yourself with other like-minded entrepreneurs who are doing their own work and normalizing thriving and normalizing success and support and boundaries is such a great way to kind of feel, coming back to your word, to feel safer in like embodying that and integrating it.
I think too, like probably even like the listeners of this podcast, right? As they're listening to you, like you're that expander for them, right? Of saying like, oh, there's someone like me that is embodying success and wealth, right? That looks like me, that feels like me, that is sensitive and empathic. Like if Catherine can do it, I can. Like I did think it is so important to see other women who are similar to us succeeding or a little further along in our journeys, right? Because I think it does show us there's a version of us that is possible.
Yeah. And a values aligned version of us,
Yes.
I had a lot of people who didn't look and act and talk like me when I started my business. They were, much more, I say masculine energy, right? Like I think I bring up feminine energy, but just kind of a lot of masculine energy.
Yes.
That's so not how I operate or even show up in coaching calls or in group calls, like I bring so much more of a welcoming perspective than kind of a authoritative presence. So I think surrounding ourselves with people who run businesses in that values aligned way is, it's so important.
Yes.
And it feels like you've really done that in your business. Like I really just appreciate the way in which you are self-revealing on social media. Like you talk a lot about your journey. No, I think it's great. Coming back to that, like that as coaches, we get to be less boundaried. We can be a little bit more out loud with our journeys.
Yes.
What was that experience like for you in giving yourself permission to be more out loud?
So fascinating, right? Because like you, exactly like you said, it was so weird. Like I remember as a therapist, you would laugh at the things I Googled as a therapist. Like number one, like, am I allowed to coach? Is it ethical to coach? Because I feel like in the like you go to school and you write papers and you get your master's and you're taking exams and you're regulated and like necessarily, right? Important that it is. But just going to that, I'm like, you mean I can just like hang my shingle and like be a coach and like collect money? Like, who's watching me? Who's examining me? Who's like, it felt like a Wild West, to be honest. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I'm Googling like, is coaching ethical, And so it just felt like this, like the whole world, like my therapy clients didn't know anything about my personal life. Right. And then I realized like, just coaching is just such a 180. And not that all coaches have to share their personal life, because I think it's just a very personal decision. Mm-hmm. What feels aligned for you.
Totally.
But it felt like a lot of congruency to be able to share my story, not really in real time. Most of my content I write and then like I sit on it for 4 months and then I allow it to come to the world for my own like healing and, therapy. But it's been a very healing for me to write and share my story. And I think healing for my audience to see, for them that have different commonalities with me, whether it's my love for social dancing, right? Or my love, or I have 2 kids that I'm obsessed with. They're my whole world, or whether it's the fact that I got divorced or like, I think like I share my story for my healing. And also I just say like, if it can help one person, that's enough,
I totally agree. Like a lot of my journey has been about healing from workaholism and truly embodying doing less and allowing that to be okay and finding other ways of finding balance and success and decollapse or uncollapsing my worth with my achievements. And it's been a journey. And every time I share a little bit more about my experience, and it feels like I hear more and more people in my own world, sometimes, close people to me talking about how they want that. And I'm like, that's amazing. Like, even if my words didn't make a difference for them, right? But it normalized that they could talk about it, or perhaps it just welcomed their own experience, their own opinions, their own unique desires, separate from what was modeled for them, or separate from what they and I learned.
I agree. I think stories are so powerful. I mean, I even think about like when I follow other, like I love to hear stories, like stories captivate us, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious, like, speaking of stories, like I think that one thing that my audience is always really inspired by are people's stories from a day job to full-time entrepreneurship. So I'd love for you to share what that journey was like for you, and your story, because I think that it's such an inspiring story for anyone who's made that transition.
Well, as all inspiring stories go, it didn't feel very inspiring in the moment.
Truth.
But essentially I transitioned during my pregnancy, sold out my coaching practice in 3 months and was able to quit my job. And I wouldn't have done it honestly without the support of, I just like, there's some things in life that in some ways, decisions can be hard for me. In some ways I'm like slower, but there's been a few moments in my life where I just somehow had the intuitive nudge and courage to just go for it. Moving back to San Diego was one of those. Another one was building my coaching business. I remember I hired my coach. I wasn't really making money at the time. I hired my business coach, Lacey. I've been working with her now forever. And I told her, I don't really know what my coaching practice is going to look like. I don't know quite what I'm going to do. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I know I'm going to figure it out. I know I'm going to be successful. And I think like that certainty gave me a lot of inertia through 3 months of really hard stuff. People saying no to me like looking silly online. Like it just like when you have that grounded, kind of like you were saying, that book Worthy, right? Like when you feel certain in your heart that you're going to figure out, that you can weather the storms, when you just put your ego out the door, it makes the ups and downs easier, because then when things go awry, you're not like, oh, maybe that's a sign I'm not supposed to do it. Right. Like, I think coming in with that, my favorite affirmation around this is my success is inevitable. And I think like I really locked into that. And that's what helped me in 90 days take a lot of brave action and like be okay with being humiliated online. I mean, no one humiliated me. It's just, being visible and like all of that is just kind of a whirlwind, right?
Well, I want to acknowledge you, because 3 months feels like a wildly short time horizon to go from idea to implementation.
If I didn't have a ticking time bomb in my belly, AKA my daughter, I swear it would have taken me 5 years, because like I just like to be more methodical in life and mindful, but like it really was a nice little urgency, right?
For sure. For sure. I have a distinction about this. Like I say that there's 2 types of change agents. There's bridge burners and bridge builders. Like you occur like the textbook bridge burner, someone who sees something they want for themselves on the other side of the bridge, and then they leap up over the bridge and burn the planks up after them. So they like have to make it work.
Well, kind of, kind of. But I did tell myself, like, if I could do it, I would quit my job. If I couldn't fill my practice, I wasn't going to quit my job. So I hadn't quit my job yet.
Yeah. Well, I fall in the other camp. Like I call myself a bridge builder, where I see something that I want for myself on the other side of the bridge. And then I slowly and safely lay the planks so that I can relatively painlessly walk from one side to the other.
I love that.
Pros and cons of both ways of being. Time's a big one, right? Your time horizon was 3 months. My journey was like a little shy of 2 years. Everyone has to find their own path, their own way.
I love that example. And I love that, like neither is wrong. Like you said, totally like knowing yourself. Like, are you the type of person that can like jump and the parachute will appear? Or like I always say, like, if that's going to paralyze you, don't do it,
Totally.
like just knowing yourself.
Yeah. I mean, knowing yourself is so important. Like had a lot of colleagues who transitioned to full-time entrepreneurship a lot quicker than I. And the lack of kind of resources and safety was truly what lit a fire under their belly to get into action. But for me, that would have paralyzed me.
Yes. Yes. I love that you're saying that. And so important for people to hear that. I think there's so much like blanket business advice, right? But to really hear that it's both are successful, whether it's 3 months or 2 years, or like, there's no right or wrong there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, I appreciate that about your work, that truly coaching to values alignment allows people to connect with their values, their own way of doing things, and then build a business that works for them.
Exactly.
That there's no textbook approach.
Though sometimes we wish there was, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of something my one of my clients said, Anna, it's so ironic because when we're having a day job, we like want a boss to stop bossing us around. But then when we're an entrepreneur, we're like, I wish I had a boss to tell me what to do and like give me the directions, right? There's trade-offs either way.
For sure. For sure. Well, as we wrap up, this podcast is really about supporting empaths in thriving, because I believe that if more entrepreneurs who cared deeply about themselves, others, and the world around them knew how to thrive, that we could truly transform the world of business. So what has supported you in becoming a prosperous empath?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm going to answer the question. But first, I just want to say that was such a good affirmation for empaths, right? Like just that sentence you said, if we believed that, right? It's safe for me as an empath to like, this isn't like a bad, like this is my superpower to like impact the world, right? I would say that like what's helped me most in being heart-centered and being empathic and succeeding has just been like getting all the support all the time, right? So like I'm a single mom. So like getting over my guilt and shame around like hiring babysitters, like getting over guilt around hiring a laundry service, having a business coach and a therapist, like basically at all times. Like I'm one of the most supported humans I know. And I think like we think that we have to do all of this alone. But I think, when I am feeling resourced and supported, then I have more time to nurture myself and have my quiet time and care for myself, even while having 2 littles. So I would just say like, that's what's helped me the most.
Huge support is so foundational. Anna, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's been such a pleasure having you and getting to know you.
I'm so grateful for you. Thank you I just love even the way you approach asking questions and interviewing. It's just been a delight to be on the show.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.